Hi, this is Sue Greenwald. I'm with Awaken Stories. I'm here today with Deanna Carr, who's with the Mystical Moonlight. Hey, Deanna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Today, I wanted to ask a bit about the Grand Canyon and some of the things we found in the Grand Canyon. And it's always a surprise topic for Dee.
Yes, it is.
Here's a really interesting topic. Is Egypt connected somehow to the Grand Canyon? So we know that in the Grand Canyon, they
Mhm.
found Egyptian artifacts and caves in at least two places, maybe more. And we've been told all sorts of different things about the Grand Canyon, but I believe they've also found UFOs in caves. And of course, the
Mhm.
government goes in and seals it all up, probably takes stuff out. But
Yeah.
was that an Egyptian territory, or can you kind of give us the history of that?
Okay, so when you're talking about this, because this I haven't had this question before. Um, what I'm getting is actually that the Grand Canyon actually has portals to different locations. So, trying to think of a good explanation. John Carter, remember you're in the caves
Yeah,
and all of a sudden portals to Mars.
yeah.
That's kind of the same thing. So it was an access point. So people could go in and out. And if you knew about these portals, you could pop in and out. So that's where we have, artifacts from different areas
Yeah.
coming through. Now, the Grand Canyon at one point was underwater. Um, but that was part of that big wave. So yes. Okay, so this is information. Okay. Okay, so it was part of the big wave because he talks about how it's from underwater. How does that make sense? Okay, so I don't know how this makes sense. They're giving me snippets. Um, yeah, it doesn't make sense. So I'll explain what I'm saying. Um, the water that was with the Grand Canyon was part of the water that washed over Egypt. That's why the water dissipated. But it also doesn't make sense with the timeline because if it's an access point, how are they bringing stuff back and forth besides just portal? Um, okay, so they okay, so they were using. Sorry, this is very complex. Okay, so they were using the access points after the. Oh, okay, okay, got it. Okay, so part of the water that was in the Grand Canyon was washed through and pushed upon on Egypt. The stuff that we're finding from Egypt was because there was a portal. Some of the Grand Canyon, um, oh my gosh, sorry, I'm losing it. Okay. The water from the Grand Canyon was used with the water to kind of disform Egypt. But there was people there that had access portals to where the Grand Canyon was. So that's where they brought stuff through. So what they deemed necessary is what they brought through. It doesn't fully make sense because they got caught off. They got caught off in the middle of it. So while they were transferring, something happened to them. So that's why we have bits and pieces.
So the caves with the stuff, basically they were portaling stuff out of Egypt, like things they wanted, like statues and gold and blah,
What
blah, blah.
what they were doing necessary, but what they could also take with them.
Yeah.
So they were able to take larger things, but they, had to figure out what was necessary at the time.
Okay. And then they got to a certain point and they couldn't do it anymore.
Yes.
It kind of reminds me of that movie, National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, where they go
Hmm.
You didn't find the underground caverns with all the stuff in it. Same thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So was the Grand Canyon at this time, was it a deep crevasse like it is now, or was it the bottom of the ocean or?
It wasn't as deep as it is now. Now some of that happened over time, like with the irregular erosion.
Yeah.
So they had access to certain caves that were a little bit higher up in the Grand Canyon versus, down further. Later on, it started to erode a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, because I know there's some spaces that are up and you can't, like the average person, you can't get to them. And of course, they've
Yeah.
cemented them up and they're shielded in many ways, I would assume, so we can't get to them.
Well, that's the points, yes.
Yeah. There is a link on my channel some here, to a good video, about the Egyptian caves, and they found
Mm.
hieroglyphics, they found all sorts of stuff in the cave, and I think they
Yeah.
even show pictures of it. But in some of the older books, you'll see newspaper clippings of newspaper reports. They found UFOs down there, they found this, they found that, and then
Mm.
that's pulled from the papers after it's printed, so
Yeah.
some people have kept copies of that.
Yeah, and then I mean you have to even think like when we were in the Grand Canyon, we saw, the cave drawing. So um
Yeah.
another good way to think about it is lands of the lost, like bits and pieces were being brought there
Yeah,
from different time frames.
yeah. Now there's also, structures or, mountains, whatever you want to call it, that look like the Sphinx in the Grand Canyon and a pyramid in the Grand Canyon. And they're
Mhm.
of course very eroded, but it really does look like the Sphinx
Mhm.
and the pyramid. Is that what they are?
Yes. So
Mm.
um afterwards, like after, the water dissipated, there was a time where they were, using the stone to create another Sphinx and pyramid kind of as a second area for them. Um, the Sphinx they're different, they're made differently. So remember how we were talking about people that can manipulate materials? Um, so instead of it being brick by brick, they were able to manipulate the materials to form into the shape of the objects.
Okay, yeah,
And what is it? The Sphinx has a different purpose. Nobody really knows what the Sphinx is for. Um, and then obviously nobody really knows what the pyramids are for. But from what I gather from the Sphinx is it is one of the points to get into inner Earth. So that's where they are trying to create a second access point because once the one was somewhat taken out, they had this one. And that's also why the Sphinx and the pyramids are kind of on lockdown since a certain point in time. They don't want people to know what it's for.
beautifully said. So when I went to Egypt, like there's armed guards, machine guns everywhere. You're not allowed to touch a stone. You're not really allowed to meditate or even close your eyes there. They're very strict about it. And you
Mhm.
could bribe guards to do stuff, but you can't really get close to anything. Also, when I was there, they had the Sphinx fenced off, and
Mhm.
there was a doorway behind the right ear of the Sphinx, I think it is. They've cemented that up. But what they were doing was putting blocks or tiles, I don't know what you call it, on the over the top of the Sphinx, which changed the geometry, shape, and of course covers up anything that's below ground. So
Yes.
yeah, I know I was there and I was like, I know what they're doing because there is a way to get under into the underground cities that way.
Hmm.
So how sneaky is that? Yeah,
Oh, very sneaky. Well, they just want people to come see it and
yeah,
get the money from it. They don't want people to actually have the experience.
right.
And then
So
they say it's for the best of, keeping the artifacts, when in
yeah.
reality it's for a different purpose.
Yeah, of course. Now there's a Sphinx, I believe, in Romania as well. And I'm sure
Mhm.
they're all over the world, but is that also like an access point?
Yes. So
Interesting.
there's certain access points that, you know, people in the past were trying to make it a little bit easier for us to get to, just
Yeah,
like the tunnels. But these points were a little bit, I guess, easier because you could just walk down into them. I mean, you have to go down lots and lots of stairs, but it was a little bit easier than, like I said earlier, trying to find little access points.
yeah,
So they don't want people going in them. So either they've been destroyed or they've been bar
right. Okay,
barricaded. I was going to say bombarded. It's the wrong word.
okay. So this is maybe a little bit of a side question. So we know that the Sphinx, they found it in the early 1900s, supposedly. This is the story we're told. And again, whether it's true or not, and they excavated it to where they see it's like a lion body and a human head.
Mhm.
Um, was the face on the Sphinx of a black person?
Yes.
Okay, is that why they've defaced the Sphinx and all the other
Mhm.
statues there in Egypt?
Yes, because they don't want people to know that they they were everywhere. I mean, they were prince and princesses and queens and kings and all that.
Mm.
They wanted them to be, you know, down on themselves so that they could oppress them, and then use them to benefit themselves.
Right,
So, they took that out so that way they would feel like they were lower, when
right,
in reality, at one point, they were the almighty in a
right.
sense.
Right. So basically, we've talked in previous videos about how the humans, we'll call them original humans on Earth because there were humans all over the universe, but the
Mhm,
ones on Earth were black. And we are not taught that. We're taught that the blacks are inferior, okay,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And that, they were slaves and that's how they came to America in this case, and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a totally wrong story. In this case, the blacks were the gods and goddesses in Egypt
mhm,
and all over, and they've defaced every statue so we don't recognize the features.
mhm.
Like I've seen it, and I thought, well, they spent a lot of time chipping away at these statues. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, because if you alter it a little bit, it loses its, the value.
Yeah,
But even today, I mean, I just saw an image not too recently where they compared just the side angle,
yeah,
and they showed it versus different races, and it matched up perfectly. And, you know, there is some stuff that is left, but they figured the more they destroyed it, the easier it would be for
yeah,
people to go with this theory.
yeah,
And it is hard because after, you're taught something, then it passes down, then it passes down. So after a certain point, you're, believing what you're told because it's been told for so long.
right.
So it's easier to believe those facts. But I think people are, coming to the common, at least some people are coming to the common sense of, this doesn't match up.
I think people are starting to, again, the people in our circles, if you will, they're starting to question the history. Like it doesn't seem like it matches up. And then we see
Yeah.
photos or, we see videos of other theories, and it's like, well, interesting. So what is the correct timeline? We don't know yet, so
Hmm.
I think we're going to be finding that out.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, there were lots more sphinxes on Earth than what we think. We think there's only the one in Egypt, but they're all over, is my
Mhm.
guess. And they've been eroded, they've been, hidden, they've, been under a state of decay, but those are the portal paths to inner Earth, right? And
Yes.
there's more, but how interesting is that? Now, why were they lion bodies and human heads, though?
Um, I don't necessarily know, but what I'm getting is that it's the relation to the cat. So what most people say is the cat has a correlation to the underworld. Now, in our depiction, the underworld is this nasty place you don't want to be.
Right.
But what if it wasn't necessarily the underworld, but an access point to what's underneath our world? So the depiction of the cat and the human was supposed to be a mixture of our world and the underworld.
Right.
So they like to do more of that.
Okay.
Um, what do you want to call it?
Some
Ah,
symbolic then.
symbolic. Yes, they
Yeah.
want to use more symbolism because even in some of their pictures they have it. But there was another god that isn't really shown in Egypt history, which is the mixture of the cat and the
Right.
human, and
Right.
that's what the statue also represents.
Okay, interesting. I heard that, cats were supposedly revered in Egypt. Now, again, whatever the story is, I don't know anymore, but,
Mm,
and of course they liked, because cats could chase away the mice and all that. But
yeah.
what I also heard is the cats, back then reported to the other planets. They were like,
Mhm.
I don't know what the word would be, but they would report, okay, this king is on point, or they're doing this now. So they were like kind of intermediaries. Does that sound like a real theory?
Yes and no. They did have communication. Cats are, a little bit, they're different than what we think. So when you look at a cat, they have reptilian eyes versus, the lions and all that, tigers. So a house cat has these reptilian eyes. So they were, I don't want to say made, but they're a mixture of different species within one species. Um, so that's where they did have communication. They were able to communicate between different species because they had that link.
Oh, I was looking at my cat the other day and looking at the
Yeah.
eyes, and I'm like, that
Mhm.
it's just very interesting that cats and goats have those eyes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the cats have more of the point at the top where the goats have more of an oval shape. Um, and then what is it? Yeah, so cats are more reptilian-like. At least some of them, not all of them. Like I said, if you look at, the larger cats, they actually have like
Yeah,
normal eyes.
yeah. Interesting. So our common house cat today, like I think some cats are more, we're gonna just say evolved. That probably isn't the best word, but they're more conscious than some cats are just like cats. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, definitely. Some of them
Yeah.
are more evolved than the
Right.
others.
So these evolved conscious cats, do they have any missions
Oh
or
yeah, I mean all animals have a mission
yeah,
here. Some of them are just, like I said, more evolved. They have a larger mission. They have a specific goal in mind. We
yeah.
might just not know it at the time. So, like you said, some of the cats were reporters, um, not all of them,
Okay.
because they were able to see, they were able to communicate between.
Okay. So were then you say cats were kind of like created.
Yes,
Will they remain here on Earth?
yes, they will.
Yay.
At
Um,
least, at least the ones that want to.
okay. And were they introduced during the time of Egypt, or were they before Egypt?
They were before Egypt, but they were more dominant in Egypt versus other species.
Okay.
So it's kind of like every like civilization has their being that they kind of, put up on a pedestal. And for them it was the cats.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it's funny how we've gone from the Grand Canyon to the Egyptian plunder to the
Yeah.
Sphinx to cats, isn't it? But isn't it
Yeah.
interesting, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
You
there
never know
anything
how it
else?
goes.
Should we know anything more about Grand Canyon? Like, I heard that the Grand Canyon was a mining community way back when, and that's why it's like dug.
I mean, there's different, it's been there for so long that it's not just one thing.
Okay.
So, you know, it what there were points that were used for mining. I mean, even if you go over to, certain areas, there's still mining areas. So,
Yeah.
um, yes, it was. Most of them have either, washed away or gone.
Yeah.
Um, so there's so many purposes to it. It's kind of like everything. Like there's just a lot going on with it,
Okay, cool. All right,
especially being access points that has
all
extra
right.
potent power.
Anything else we need to know about the Grand Canyon, Sphinxes?
I
Um,
don't think so. Right now, I'm not getting anything else.
okay,
But if people have questions, let me know.
all right, all right. Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.